All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. My name is Hala Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am pleased to welcome you to today's reading of New Fantasy from the Press. We'll be hearing from J.L. Stewart, reading from Avarom and the Black Riders, released April 27th. Frank C. Schütz, reading from The Traveler, Quest for the Twins, released June 11th, just yesterday. And Demitrios Lopez, reading from Sigma, Thumos Rising, releasing July 15th. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be ordered on Atmosphere Press's website. That's at atmospherepress.com/books. I'm also going to put some links in the chat for you so you can check those out. At the end of today's event, we're also going to have time for audience questions. So during the readings, if you have a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type those in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. And then during the actual reading itself, please stay muted to keep extraneous sound at a minimum. Of course, you can certainly feel free to use the chat for any praise and comments. And one last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we are always looking to read them, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting JL, Frank, and Justin today. We're going to start off with our first reader, who is Frank C. Schütz. Frank was born in Minnesota and currently resides in Columbus, Ohio. Writing many technical and academic pieces throughout his life, Frank started writing fiction in 2013. Frank's diverse life experiences include a BA in philosophy, an MDiv degree, a career in information technology, and service in the Army in the Vietnam era in the 82nd Airborne, where he earned several honors, including Jungle Warfare Expert Certification. Frank was married to the love of his life, Leslie, for 43 years, who passed in April 2021. Frank is now retired and enjoys spending time with his family and writing fantasy. After growing up in the isolated Western Mountains, in the story that we'll be hearing from today, Eilon finally ventures out to explore the unfamiliar lowlands in search of her missing aunt and uncle, who vanished when she was just a child. Despite her initial insistence on going alone, she finds unexpected support in the traveler, who volunteers to guide her through the perilous territories inhabited by diverse lowland peoples. Let's welcome Frank now. Frank, you can go ahead and unmute and begin your reading.
All right, I think I'm unmuted. You hear me? Okay.
All good, yes.
I will just go ahead and jump right into the reading because I want to read as much as I can in the time allotted. I originally thought I would just read as much as I could of the first chapter, but I'm going to skip some places in order to try to introduce you all to a few more of the characters than I would have gotten to anyway. So I will begin again. There we go. The Traveler, Quest for the Twins. I guess I should mention that I had one story to begin with, but as I began to write it, I realized it was going to be at least 3 books. So this is the first of those. All right. Chapter 1, Trail's End. Scene 1, Arrival. The tall young woman was constantly shifting in her saddle, covered almost completely by her greatcoat and hood to protect her from the weather. She glanced at her companion and wondered at his relaxed manner. But then she thought, this is not his quest. He is just my guide and companion. Still, she had never seen him anything but calm. He was always fully in control. She tried to have that kind of calm. She had been trying all her life. but could never quite distance herself enough from her feelings, especially now as they were approaching the end of the Federation Road and what could be the end of their quest after 6 weeks on the trail. Even the long hours in the saddle and the weather could not suppress her excitement. Once they reached the tiny village, she was sure they would find Bisha, or at least get the first definite word about where she was. Scene 2, A Cold Welcome. The sleepy little village called Trail's End lay deserted, its inhabitants safely tucked into their homes. It was cold, and the rain sliced down in tiny icy spikes. The dozen or so buildings huddled together were barely discernible through the rain and fog where they lay hidden from the eyes of civilization. Few had any reason to come to Trail's End, and fewer still had any reason to leave. A lone big man stood still on the porch under the protection of the awning, watching the rain and pondering how he and his wife had ended up in this isolated hamlet. He stepped out from under the porch awning onto the deserted street. His wide-brimmed hat and waxed leather greatcoat deflected the constant drizzle of the freezing rain, but it could not entirely protect him from the evening chill. As he carefully stepped onto the rain-slicked paving stones, he hunched over for protection. He stood for a moment, head bowed in thought. He shivered, unable to shake a sense of foreboding. He told himself it was the weather, but could not quite make himself believe it. He was glad to be heading home to Marta. Marta was his best friend and a good partner through their many years together. This was not a good time for her, and he wanted to be with her. He began to walk carefully, turning north toward the little side road that would take him home. He was wondering if things could get any worse than they had gotten in the last few weeks. He stopped unexpectedly at the sound. He stopped at an unexpected sound. Mr. Steele, it was young Jake running in from the South Watch. A prickly chill ran down his spine. What is it, Jake? There's 2 riders coming up from the South Road, and they look like warriors, but Mr. Steele, they's not in Federation gear. The man frowned, wondering who would be traveling way out here. There's just the 2 of them? Yes, sir. We followed back to see if any more was coming behind, but they's alone. Do they look threatening? Well, if you mean dangerous, then yeah, they do. But if you mean intended mischief, then they just slow riding in on them huge horses. He sighed. All right, Jake. I'll go out to meet them. But just in case, run on down and let Harry know what's happening. Yes, sir, Mr. Steele. He forgot about Jake, wishing he could go on home. But it was his job as mayor to make sure strangers were welcomed and to find out why they were here. Steele turned west to walk down Main Street, passed by Gardner's stables, and came to the last building on the street. He smiled at the familiar smell of the smithy. After all these years he had worked there, he still loved the smell of charred wood and ashes, not to mention the metallic tinge in the air. But he was retired now. He chuckled at himself. He had retired only to be elected mayor. Not much of a retirement. He turned onto the South Road and stood watching for the strangers. He could just make out the trees as darker shadows through the evening fog. His rambling thoughts scattered as 2 large figures slowly took form in the fog like ghostly spirits. His features went taut as he squinted his eyes. The 2 figures began to take more recognizable form, and he thought Jake didn't exaggerate about the horses. They were the biggest horses he'd ever seen, and he'd seen a good many in his years of smithing. But as their forms coalesced out of the fog, something else caught his attention. The size of the man and woman riding the big horses. They were wearing loose-fitting traveling clothes with heavy leather breeches. They may look like warriors to young Jake, he thought, and maybe they were, but they were not wearing any military clothing of any sort he had ever seen. The woman was riding a large chestnut mare, and the man a giant black stallion. As the mist slowly parted before them, he saw the woman wore all dark forest green, even her greatcoat and leather boots. The man was dressed similarly, but all in black. Their clothing was stained with mud, and their blouses were worn. Their garments had a distinctly foreign look that somehow seemed familiar. It was impossible to see their features under their hoods. The two stopped about 5 feet from in front of him and waited silently. The man sat his horse easily, as if he had just returned from a quiet evening ride. The woman sat with her back stiff and straight, but her hands held the reins loosely. After a moment, the woman urged her horse forward and turned a bit so as to be able to look down at him. Gus felt small under her gaze. He shifted his weight. I should have greeted them by now. He cleared his throat, put his best smile on, and tried to sound like he meant what he said. Welcome, welcome to our little village. What are such noble travelers doing in these humble parts? The woman leaned forward and answered very formally. I am Elon Eichen, and this is my traveling companion, Gunta Black. Thank you for your welcome. We are here looking for friends. We heard they came this way. She spoke as a superior officer might speak to a subordinate. She wasn't threatening, but Gus shivered when he saw her features, especially her hair. I see. Who are these friends you're looking for? Micah and Bisha Shearman. We were told at Newtown they had come this way many years ago. Gus's eyes narrowed and he opened his mouth to say something, but when nothing came to him, he shook his head and put his smile back on. Yes, I know who you are speaking of, he sighed, deciding they meant no harm. I'm forgetting my manners. My name is Gus Steele, and I'm the mayor of this little town. We could talk in a bit, but it's getting late. We should get out of this weather. Let's get your horses settled, and then we can talk in the warmth of my house. We do not want to impose, the woman said hastily. We can stay in an inn. The big man, Elon called Gunta, remained still and quiet. Gus managed to chuckle. There's no inn here, just the hospitality of humble folk. Jake, why aren't you back at your post? Well, I'm bringing Mr. Carter like he's asked. Besides, Bobby went and took my place since he was ready. Ah, well then, make yourself useful and put these fine animals up in the stables. Yes, sir. Jake waited to take the horses with a gaping smile on his face. Excuse me. The short, stocky man who came with Jake now stood beside Gus. Hi, Harry. I want you to meet two visitors. This is Elon Eichen and Gunta Black. Come looking for some friends. Turning to the visitors, he said, and this is Harry Carter, our baker, grocer, and when needed, the closest thing to a marshal we have up here. Again, it was Elon who spoke. We are pleased to meet you, Mr. Carter. Her companion only nodded in acknowledgement. Oh, just call me Harry, and pleased to meet you as well. We don't often get travelers up here. Elon replied, Yes, you are out of bounds, but we were told our friends came here. Oh, well, I'm sure Gus will give you more help than me. Looks like he's getting ready to take you home. Marta's sure to give you a good, warm meal. So if you please, I'll be getting home to my own lovely wife. But let me know if there's anything I can do. The strangers nodded their farewell and dismounted as Harry faded into the fog. They kept their packs, but gave the magnificent animals into Jake's care. Elon leaned close to Jake and spoke to him face to face. Thank you for your kindness, Jake. Please take good care of them. Jake got a good look at her face, his eyes wide, his mouth dropped open. Yes, sir, ma'am. I'll take good care of them, as long as they're here. The kind words and the sight of this breathtaking stranger were enough to occupy his mind and conversation for months to come. The cold and the rain of this night were entirely gone from his memory. Now I'm going to skip forward a little bit. We'll see how far I go. If I go too long, say something. Actually, this goes to the next chapter. They find out that, I'll just say, I won't tell you all everything, but they just find out that some twins have disappeared. And Elon and Gunta, along with Gus and a fisherman, crossed the sea, the shallow sea, in order to look for the twins. But now we're going to go back a little bit. Second chapter, The Other Side of the Sea, scene 1, 11 days earlier. The sun was shining. The few scattered billowy white clouds floated gently east on the light breeze. A perfect spring day. The boat rocked gently as the two young fishermen detached the last of their catch from the nets to drop into the water pen. It was already the best day of fishing this year. They sat back, smiling at each other. Look at all these fish, Hal, the young blond boy said with a crooked grin. We've had a good day, and it's still early. Alan could see it coming. Let's go to the other side. We have plenty of time. The two young siblings looked much alike in their large fishing boat, tall and athletic, light blonde hair, strong, perfect features, and light brown eyes. The eyes were the one thing they had gotten from their father. His eyes sparkled with mischief, hers with amusement. Holland groaned even as she smiled at her brother. Gayer, you know Grandma and Grandpa are expecting us for dinner. Oh, you know they won't be surprised. They'll know we decided to spend the night on the other side. It's not like we haven't done it before. But we didn't prepare for this. When's that ever stopped us? Besides, maybe we'll see Sheila, and maybe we can get her to tell us some of her exciting stories this time. She thought it sounded fun, but said, what if it rains? She knew the answer before she finished the question. She could see it in his eyes. I brought our ponchos. You are hopeless. It would be fun. With a victorious gleam in his eyes, Gayer said, then it's settled. We're going to our beach. Holland smiled. She shared her twin sense of adventure, but he could be so careless sometimes. He didn't always win these debates, but he always had some scheme. The truth was she loved it, even when her practical side objected. I'll go ahead and, how's my time?
That's a great place to pause, actually, Frank. So thank you so much.
All right.
Really, I mean, you set the scene really well for us there, and it's kind of this big world feeling that we get from that. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to have our second reader now. Our second reader will be J.L. Stewart. JL is presently an active duty component of the United States Army. The works of Ray Harryhausen, Robert Jordan, L. Sprague de Camp, Robert Wise, Howard Hawks, and Robert E. Howard are just some of the influences for J.L. Stewart. For more information on the Avarom saga, from which we'll be hearing today, characters, and other works of J.L. Stewart, please visit www.avaromredqueen.net. In the book that we'll be hearing from today, Avarom and the Black Riders. An elusive pirate is captured and brought before the Red Queen for judgment. He and what's left of his crew tell a fantastic tale of death and destruction, relentlessly heading toward the kingdom of Servitica. Mystical soldiers of unlimited strength are desolating everything in their path with the solitary goal of destroying the Red Queen's bodyguard, Avarom. And they're not the only ones who wish to destroy him. We'll hear more of the story now from JL.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you can. Great. My name is JL Stewart. I am the author of Avarom and the Black Riders. This is the third book in the series, and I will be reading an excerpt from the third book, Avarom and the Black Riders. Now, be advised, I have not read like this since my daughter was 6 years old, Adriana. So let's get started and let me set the scene. Now, imagine, if you will, a massive gray stone wall, about 35 feet in height, with a width approximately 15 feet. The giant wooden gates with two sliding logs used as bolts were all made from the strongest Servican oak from the forest. This represented the northern entrance to the kingdom of Servitica. Now, that self-same gate, along with the wall, all but smashed in by three Black Riders who sought to invade Servitica. Avarom, the Red Queen's bodyguard, along with his comrades, Gullub the woodsman, and Captain Tarak, were inadvertently caught in the middle of this invasion while escorting Princess Gillen on a goodwill tour. That was the setting. Here's the excerpt from Avarom and the Black Riders. The Black Riders were about 5 to 10 paces away and were more than likely seeking to surround him. Avarom knew they were faster and stronger than any mere mortal. His best bet was to outmaneuver them, cripple them until reinforcements arrived. He had to delay them to give Princess Gillen a chance to get away. As long as she was safe, nothing else mattered. Avarom poised himself in a battle-ready stance. He knew he had to make the first move, cover the distance before the Black Riders could form a strategy to counterattack. Tensing his muscles, Avarom took a deep breath and released it as he prepared to lunge into battle. "That's enough," bellowed a strong feminine voice that echoed all about them. Avarom, taken aback by the voice from nowhere, glanced about his surroundings, but still maintained his heightened sense of security toward the adversaries before him. The Black Riders were just as confused as they stopped their approach to look at the person who shouted such a command. "Your tricks shall not stop us from destroying you," the lead Black Rider hissed, focusing his attention back to Avarom as he prepared to advance toward him. "I said, that's enough." All turned about and then looked up as a female fell from the sky and landed with a thud diagonally between them. The impact of her bended knee arrival was not a gentle one and left a slight indentation on the ground from her black boots. Her burgundy wardrobe that represented more of a military fashion encased a well-figured body in tight pants and a double-breasted tunic with gold buttons. The gold-rimmed hood of the tunic covered a good portion of her face, but not the contorted scowl of disgust upon her lips. Her attention was on the Black Riders, and the Black Riders alone. "Who are you?" the lead Black Rider asked. For a moment, she stood motionless, almost statuesque. Her jaw and lips motioned as if preparing to give a response, but in the end, maintained their visage of disgust. Then slowly, methodically, she took a step toward the Black Riders. Avarom used this moment of distraction to slowly back away. He kept his guard up, but moved cautiously and as silently as he could out of range of what possibly be a monumentous battle. Avarom knew this was out of his league and did not want any part of it. When he was far enough away, Avarom watched this woman walk fearlessly towards the Black Riders. She carried no weapon upon her person, nor was there anything in her hands that resembled one. The black rider that spoke with Avarom motioned one of his comrades to move toward their approaching adversary, obviously to attack her. Avarom watched as the woman suddenly stopped and slowly assumed the position of one about to sprint or to fight as a black rider rushed to confront her. The hands of this woman became unclenched and flat as she stood motionless. As the black rider fell upon her with the thought to lay her low with a single blow of its right hand, the woman effortlessly snatched its right arm as it came down with her left hand. Using her right hand, she swiftly backhanded the black rider in a slicing motion with an open palm across its neck, and then, using the same hand, sliced off its arm held by her left hand. Tossing the disembodied arm over her shoulder, she watched as her adversary took one step toward her, only to have his head fall off. Its body soon collapsed at her feet. As I stated, she bellowed, swiftly moving toward another black rider to drive her fist into and through its midsection. She then placed her left hand on the shoulder of the black rider as she spread her arms wide, ripping her confused adversary in two. That's enough. Who are you? Hissed the black rider. Avarom could tell the black rider was angry just from its tone. Probably for the first time in its mystical life, it was now confronted with something it could not understand nor conquer. For now, it faced something mightier than it had ever faced, something that rendered its fellow black riders useless in a matter of moments and showed no fear in doing so. The real question here is, who are you? Where did you hail from? The final black rider obviously did not like to be questioned by an unknown enemy, and rather than wait to be attacked, it rushed toward. For anyone else facing off with this black rider in such a manner, death would have been instantaneous from the immediate combination of blows it hurled towards its adversary. But this was no ordinary enemy the black rider faced. It was a person endowed with such strength and speed as to block and thwart every blow that came her way. Avarom watched dumbfounded as blows rained down upon this woman were effortlessly blocked or dodged. Blows that would have crushed a man's skull were either pushed away or outmaneuvered with calculating ease. After a few moments of what Avarom figured she was toying with her adversary, she swiftly reached in with her left hand and secured the black rider's throat, raised it up, and slammed its entire body onto the ground. What are you? She asked in a voice just short of a growl. This is not possible. Who? What are you? My name is Hellstorm. Tell your master and all those that would dance that I am coming for them. This is not over. Yes, yes, it is, she grinned. Avarom watched the hand of the woman still clasping the throat of the black rider as it suddenly began to radiate. Her hand began to glow and melt the black rider until there was nothing left other than the latter half of its body. Through the smoke, he could see her rise and face him. She stood for a moment looking at him, and then stepping over the remains of the black rider, approached Avarom. And this is where I end, pending any questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Jean. We're gonna have time for our audience Q&A after our third reader goes, but I feel like there's gonna be a lot of intrigue there. You're a very natural storyteller also. That was very exciting. I can totally hear, that voice, like you said, for your daughter. But at this point, we're gonna have our final reader for today. So we'll be hearing from Demitrios Lopez. Demitrios, or Justin, lives in Texas with his daughter and puppy dog, where he teaches ancient Greek and Latin. The classics saved his life, and it was from their seeds that the Tree of the Sigma series grew. Aside from being a dad, writing, and teaching, he loves Zack Snyder movies, especially Man of Steel, Grease, and Peanut Butter. Learn more at www.demitrioslopez.com. Today, we will be hearing from the book Thumos Rising. With the world of Nineveh on the brink of annihilation, Zeno finds himself pitted against a vampiric overlord from beyond the stars. The tyrant, wraith-like purple glowing from his eyes, is obsessed with one thing, unraveling the mystery of the Sigma, a primordial and otherworldly power. Power that has chosen Zeno as its champion. Justin, the virtual podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Hala, and thank you so much to everyone for showing up. And I especially want to thank my people. It means so much to see all of your faces here. It really does just make my heart overflow. So just a little bit of an introduction, both into the book and into the scene before I jump in and start reading. So as Hala mentioned, I'm a Greek and Latin teacher by trade. And even in the title, you can see that there's Greek and Latin fingerprints all over this thing. So if you've got a soft spot for the Greco-Roman world, Greek mythology, this series I think will definitely pique your interest. So the scene I'm going to read is going to be from chapter 11 of Sigma Book 1, Thumos Rising. And so what's going on here, our main protagonist, our hero, Zeno, finds himself being led by his mentor, by his surrogate father, a man named Lysandros, into the forest to a crashed alien spaceship. Again, Zeno is very much, he's a messiah figure. Think Jesus, think Superman, think Paul Atreides. And he has no idea why they're here. His understanding is that they come to this very secret location because Lysandros has told him that they're going to find a weapon, a weapon of incredible power that's going to allow them to win this war that they find themselves engaged in. You see, both Zeno and Lysandros are revolutionaries. They are leading a rebellion against a also alien, tyrannical, vampiric creature. And he's got the whole world of Nineveh wrapped up in this totalitarian system, right? And they're trying to liberate it, but they can't do this on their own. So they need power, and they've come here into this forest, to this crashed spaceship, trying to find it. Lysandros takes Zeno inside the spaceship, and he introduces him to this very mysterious woman, and that is where we pick up the scene. I am the priestess of the light goddess Sophia, the woman said, goddess of wisdom and keeper of this place. You must be wondering why Lysandros brought you here. Zeno eyed the priestess uneasily. He could feel himself slouching. Her gaze weighed heavy on him. Zeno could barely nod and reply. The priestess reached out and took Zeno by the hand. Her touch was soft, but it was the touch of a woman who knew she completely owned the moment. There is no need to fear, she said. I am on your side and want to do good for you, not ill. Walk with me, and I will tell you a story. They walked through a door and down a long hall of Cyclopean stone. As they walked, the priestess began. First, you must understand that there is much we don't know. Many are uncomfortable with this uncertainty. It scares them. In order to provide themselves with a false sense of security, they create answers where there are none. They pretend these answers are true and refuse to acknowledge any doubt or uncertainty. These people are like leaves, tossed by the winds of chance and their emotions, pretending to know things they don't know and, in the process, closing themselves off to any real knowledge. Do not be like these men, Zeno. Be comfortable with not knowing. That is the beginning of real knowledge. What we do know is this. There is something. We are conscious, and that cannot be an illusion. Even if all the world around us is a dream, we are no less part of that dream. Therefore, the dream is real to us. We believe that the All-Fire is responsible for this. This All-Fire, which both possess consciousness and will, is both the creator of the universe and the material of which it is made. All things were made from it. All things are it. And within it, all things reside. As you well know, Zeno, fire comes from light, and from light, heat. As heat rises, the molecules move about more and more, causing expansion. But as heat decreases, the molecules slow, causing contraction. From the cooling of the all-fire, galaxies and worlds and the things which inhabit those worlds came to be. How many galaxies and how many worlds are within those galaxies? None can say. Mystics and holy men say that from this cooling came the first life, the archaioi, great and horrific beings of terrible power. Then came the light gods, Sophia, the wise, Andrea, the brave, and Philos, the benevolent, as well as the dark gods, Akos, the sorrowful, Ultor, the avenger, and Furens, the mad. Then other forms of life, ranging from sentient beings who possess consciousness down to single-cell creatures. Is any of this true? None can say. But the Stoichians were real. Their civilization spread across the galaxy and lasted billions of years. For eons, the Stokians believed they were the only sentient race in the universe, until the others came to them. We do not know who these others were, or how old they were, or where they come from. We know only that they were much older than the Stokians. Through their science and technology, they discovered a new type of matter in the vastness of space, one not comprised of the Allfire. It was like the Allfire in all respects, but it was colder in comparison, darker. What the others called this, we do not know, but the Stokians called it dark fire. These others learned that by purging themselves of the Allfire and reconstituting themselves with the dark fire, they could prolong their lives. They could cheat death. But there was a terrible price. The more dark fire was within them, the longer they lived, but the less human they became. If they re-engineered themselves with only the dark fire, they lived eternally but became animals, devoid of consciousness. Thus they learned that the dark fire had to be tempered with all fire. This limited how long they lived, but allowed them to retain consciousness. It was the perfect compromise between longevity and viability. The one who unlocked this secret for them was a scientist, Ariel. She became the one who would govern the delicate mixture of dark fire and all fire. First, she became their de facto queen, then their goddess. As eons passed, the created thing became the creator. Their society, ancient and advanced, abandoned their reason and clung to the religious dogma that grew around their discovery, the gospel of Ariel. Whoever they were before, they forgot. They became the Ariads. Ariel and her followers would invade a world and kill all who did not convert to their cult of immortality. The Stokians waged war against Ariel and her armies for centuries. Finally, they won, but at great cost. The Stokians defeated the Ariads, but their planet was destroyed in the conflict. They then set out to all corners of the galaxy in search of a new home. This crashed ship that you're in now, landed on Nineveh some 90 million years ago, when the race of men was still young, before we lived in cities or had writing. There were few survivors, but those who did survive intermarried with Ninevonians. In time, this ship, this artifact of a far more ancient and advanced people, was forgotten. The forest grew around it. The ship and the Stokians passed from history to legend, from legend to mythology, then were lost. But not all forgot. For this ship is special. In this ship, there is a chamber, the only one of its kind throughout the thousands of universes, the Theomorphosis chamber, built for one purpose, to join the Allfire with the one whom it chose. What do you mean the one whom it chose? Zeno asked. As I told you before, the priestess continued, the Allfire is conscious. Indeed, what in the universe could be more conscious? This was the great weapon the Stokian used against the Ariads. It was the Allfire itself. They found a way to bind a piece of the infinite inside a finite being. It is difficult to say how exactly this came to be. We know only what the ancestors passed down to us. The Allfire brought great light, which in turn brought heat. Heat is power. This power was passed on to a man called Thumos. The Stokian, the Allfire chose to be its host. Thumos became a god-man, capable of great wonders. His flesh became armor unto itself. He was practically impossible to kill. His strength was that of a god, as was his mind. He could manipulate matter at the atomic level. Imbued with this power, Thumos broke Ariel's army and stopped the spread of her faith across the universe. The three reached a great door at the end of the hall. The priestess opened the door and led Zeno down a dark spiral staircase. She slid her arm down and took Zeno by the hand. The priestess then raised their united hands and cupped them in her free hand. She knows she's the only thing helping me maintain my sanity and discipline in this place, Zeno thought, this place which straddled the boundary between worlds. The priestess continued, as you well know, Zeno, this ship has a spirit of its own. It hides from those by whom it does not wish to be seen, and even if found, it has a way of defending itself. Over time, the tales of terror spread. Only the bravest or most foolish would ever come looking for Thumos' power. But the surviving Stokians who found a new home on this planet formed an order, the Order of Sophia, dedicated to protect the Theomorphosis chamber. Century after century, one priestess of our order would pass on their guard to the next. I took over this role from my mistress, and another will take it after me, for Sophia must always have a voice among men, even if a quiet and hidden one. It is our role to guard this sacred place and to wait. Wait for what? Zeno asked. The Stokians promised that another host would come one day, an heir of their line, who, like Thumos before him, would be imbued with the Allfire. They came to the bottom of the staircase and entered another hall. As the doors parted, hot light flooded the dark room they were exiting and illuminated the huge room in which they now stood. The hall was massive, with a single aisle extending from the doorway up to a staircase. The aisle was flanked on both sides by pillars of fire that almost touched the ceiling with their flames. At the top of the staircase was a great statue of a warrior. Like the reliefs decorating the halls of the ship, he was nude. Beneath the statue was a stone sarcophagus, decorated with ancient alien symbols, most notably the Sigma. This is the Theomorphosis chamber, the priestess informed Zeno, leading him to the base of the statue. It is you, Zeno. You, Xenosthenes Andrea, whose name means courage, raised in the poverty of Limni. You were born to be one with the All-Fire. Indeed, you are the power of Thumos. You are the love song of the dark gods below. You are the vengeful ghost of the night. You are the last heir of the Stokians. You can defeat the one known as the vampire and avenge this world. Will you accept this great honor? Zeno's heart raced. His breath quickened and became shallow. His muscles tensed up, but he could feel himself lightly shaking. His chest grew heavy. His stomach dropped as he felt he would vomit right there. He was terrified beyond reason. Zeno opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Lysandros, whose eyes were fixed on him, and then turned back to the priestess. He could feel the fear building inside of him, fighting, clawing its way to the surface. He kept expecting to wake up, but with every moment that passed, he became acutely aware that this was reality. I can't do this, Zeno stammered. I don't want this responsibility. I absolutely don't want this power. Neither did Thumos, the priestess rebutted. Those who are worthy of great power seldom want it, and those who seek it are seldom worthy of it. It's a curious paradox. I won't take it, Zeno yelled. I don't want to be here anymore. Zeno, Lysandros stepped in. Please calm. No, get me out of here now. It's not that easy, Zeno, Lysandros said. No, you lied to me. I want to leave. It is all right, Lysandros, the priestess interjected. There's no need to run, Zeno. You are as much master of this ship as I. Thumos is your father. Sophia is your mother. This ship and the ghosts that dwell within will never harm you. If you wish to leave, I will escort you to the door. The priestess stepped past both Zeno and Lysandros and began walking the way they had come. Zeno eyed her with great suspicion. Lysandros stared at Zeno grimly. Zeno then stepped past Lysandros. He turned to give his mentor a cold stare and then continued after her. Lysandros too followed them back the way they had come. The outer door slowly opened when they reached them. The dark forest looked as welcome to Zeno as a lighthouse to a ship tossed at sea on a dark night. The priestess stopped at the threshold of the doors. Zeno did not stop or acknowledge her at all. He just kept walking. When you change your mind, Zeno, Thumos will be waiting for you. I will be waiting for you. I won't change my mind, Zeno replied without turning. You will. You're just not ready right now. You won't be ready when you return either. But the goddess does not call those who are ready. She makes ready whom she calls. She will call your name, and you will answer. That's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Justin. Again, really like bringing up a lot of intrigue and setting up a really interesting world and premise. So yeah, thank you so much for that reading. At this time, we do have time for our audience Q&A. So if anyone has a question for one or more of the authors, go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. We've already got a couple of questions lined up. So this first one is for all three authors. This person says, each of your books are set in completely different but immersive worlds. How did you create them in a way that made them feel real and lived in? Maybe we could go in reading order. So Frank, if you could start us off with this one. Oh, it looks like you're still muted, Frank.
There we go. Yeah, I was on the way to unmute. Boy, that could be a complicated question. Especially since I have a neurodiversity called aphantasia, which means I don't have a mind's eye. I cannot see when I read a world or when I make up a fantasy world, I can't see it in my head like most people can. But I've learned how to get around that. I know what it looks like. I just have to think a lot more. And the way this came about was that I got a story in my mind. An idea of characters in a undeveloped world. So I just kept working on it, and basically I kept writing the story, and as I did that, I had to expand the universe and define things a little bit more. And one thing I did do is fairly early on, I built a pretty large map of this whole world. And so as things came along, I had to fit the story into the map and keep true to the distances and the terrain and that sort of thing. So that's how I kept myself focused to do that. There's also on aphantasia.com, there's an article I wrote kind of talking a little bit about this subject also. If you go to aphantasia.com and articles, you'll find it there.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds a little bit like it was somewhat piecemeal, kind of, in a way that world history kind of is. One thing develops from the next. So I guess that it really makes sense how that would become a really real feeling world that way. So totally makes sense. Jumping to Gene, how did you? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just said it's real to me.
Oh, of course, the most important thing.
Yeah.
Um, Jumping to Gene, how did you create your world setting for this book?
Safe to say it wasn't easy. Uh, this whole Avarom series started off as a love letter, actually. I met a young lady back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I wrote her a love letter. And she read it and said, "Hey, can you make this longer?" And I said, "Okay, sure." So I made it longer, but I made it into a sword and sorcery epic. And when I handed it to her, it was like maybe 5 pages. She said, "Make it 5 pages more." And that's what I did. And it just morphed from there. It just continued to go on and on. And I used my resources from Tolkien's work, uh, Conan series by Robert Jordan and L. Sprang de Camp, uh, all those movies I used to watch as a kid back in the 70s with Ray Harryhausen, Jason and the Argonauts, the Sinbad movies. I drew from those in which a good story mattered more than just special effects. If you don't have a good story, the special effects mean nothing. So I used that and had make sure it had a philosophical tone behind it as well, because I wanted to give the readers uh, action and something to think about as well. So I chose sword and sorcery as my best bet.
Yeah, there's so many different directions that could go in, especially when you're creating something that doesn't have to obey the laws of the quote unquote real world. I bet it really helps to kind of, decide what are you focusing on and really developing from there. So that definitely goes into that realism element part of it for fantasy, which I guess is a little bit strange, but I think that's what makes it the most believable.
It is, and I had a good faith teacher. She's online right now, Sherilyn Stewart, in which I used the last part of her name for the book as well. And the JL Stewart is actually my first and last name, and Stewart is her name because that's my well, she's like my reverend, my deacon, my faith healer. All my problems I run to her for, and she casually helps me out as best as she could. So yes. Uh,
Yeah.
there was a lot that's involved in writing this book, and I use actual people. So the personalities that you're reading are from actual people that I've run into, not only just in the military, but in my private life as well. So I ask for a photo of each person, and I give it to the artist who's overseas. She's in Europe. Each person, and from
Right.
that
Yeah.
I draw the personality and the art from that and make it into a character. This is
Yeah.
distinctively where fact meets fiction.
Well, yeah, I mean, that all kind of feeds into it, right? I do also want to hear
Yes.
from Justin, where did that um, inspiration or the foundation of the building the actual world for your book come from?
Yeah, so for me, really two main sources. The first would be He-Man and the Masters of the universe. That is correct. I am a child of the 80s. And if anyone remembers back in the day, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, yep, that cartoon. That world was one in which it blended a lot of elements of both fantasy and sci-fi. You had sorcerers and scientists. You had dragons and spaceships. And you had, swords and laser guns on the battlefield. And you get all that in not only this book, but all the books of the series, right? The second thing is, as I mentioned earlier, being a Greek and Latin prof, I wanted every civilization to look like a real civilization from, just pre-industrial revolution. So one civilization looks a lot like the Greeks. Another looks a lot like feudal Japan. A third looks a lot like the Comanche. A fourth looks like the Romans, and yet a fifth looks like the Mongols. So again, kind of being, I'm also a veteran and being a military guy myself, I've always been fascinated by, okay, what would happen if like samurai took on Greek style hoplites? And that's kind of what I get to do in this book series. I also give them laser guns, right? Which makes it really interesting. So yeah, real history and He-Man.
The most important inspirations for any piece of work, I would say. We actually also have another question for you, Justin. This person says, Plato said, "He who does not desire power is fit to hold it." Did that quote in any way influence the philosophy in Thumos Rising?
Absolutely. I will keep this short. So the whole series is going to be an analogy for Stoicism. And again, if you know your Stoic philosophy, Marcus Aurelius, he was a big fan of the philosopher king, right? And that's basically the idea, right? The only person fit to have power is the one that doesn't want it. And when you're talking about absolute power, the only one that's fit to hold it is someone that sees it as a burden. Again, like Superman's an alien that could destroy the entire world. Why do we like this guy? Why aren't we cheering for Lex Luthor? Well, it's because he doesn't really want to be Superman, right? Like what he wants to do is like go off with Lois Lane and like raise a quiet family on the farm. But he just happens to be in a world where he wakes up and he can hear the cries of people halfway across the world if there's an earthquake somewhere in Sri Lanka, right? And he just can't sleep unless he does something. And so likewise, Zeno is going to be the philosopher king archetype. Throughout the series, he's going to get more and more powerful. And the real question is going to be, can he have that godlike power and still retain his humanity? Because sometimes the problem with the philosopher king is they're a little too detached, right? I don't know. We'll have to find out.
Hey, yeah, we can definitely. I love hearing all of the, like you said, historical influences and just kind of expanding on that. So, it's great. We have another question for all three authors. This person wants to know, how long did it take you to complete the writing of your book? Maybe Jean, do you want to start us off with this one?
Well, let's see. The average time is about 6 months to a year, depending on how the muses are using me. Because if the muses get if the muses get a writer's block, it affects me as well. So I say about 6 months to a year. Uh, I do at least, or my goal is to do one chapter per week, and then review that chapter the following week before starting the second one. So I say about 6 months to a year.
Yeah. How about you, Frank? What is the sort of timeline for writing this book?
Well, I started in 2013, so, and I didn't actually, I sent it to Atmosphere before I went to any other agents or book publishers. So that was last October, somewhere around there, September, I think. Anyway, so it's been about 10 and a half years before I felt ready. And of course, Atmosphere helped me with the somewhat. It was all, didn't change it a lot, but it I think helped me make it a lot better with the developmental editing. And so, yeah, it took me a long time. But a lot of that was learning how to write. I've written a lot in my life, but all of it's been technical or more scholarly type stuff. So I did not have a lot of experience writing fiction, even though I had a lot of experience reading it. I love fantasy and sci-fi as well, but especially fantasy. So I had to kind of learn to write, especially with my aphantasia. I had to learn how to describe things because most aphantasics skip over descriptions in books. I never did, but I had to learn how you do that in a way that readers are going to enjoy it. So hopefully I did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely lean on the longer side myself, so I'm really feeling that answer. How about you, Justin? What is the timeline for you in writing a book, or at least writing this book?
Okay, so in terms of like getting serious about it, I would say about 2 years, maybe a little less. But I could also tell you again, going back to its roots, I was playing out this story with my He-Man toys when I was 6 years old, like back in 1986, 87, right? So again, I mean, I had to, as it developed, of course, it became its own thing. Um, right? It took on a life of its own. I mean, with different characters, different stories, different mythology, the whole thing. But the basic plot, yeah, I mean, it's been digging around in there a long time.
If I could just mention that, even though it was almost 11 years, I did write this book and the next one, and a good start on the third one. So, so I'm a little further along than it might have sounded.
Yeah, bumping up that average, or actually lowering that average time a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, so we do have just one more question. This is one more question for all three authors, and this person is wanting to know, how did you come up with these different characters? Let's go to Jean. I know you brought that up a little bit earlier, so just wondering if there's anything you wanted to add about how you populated your book.
Yeah, as I stated, it's based on actual people that I've come across in life. Avarom, which is the main character, is named after my father. I just spelled his name backwards. My father's name is Moravia, but if you spell it backwards, you have Avarom. And that's what I've done with the majority of the characters in the book, is I basically just did a word scramble with their names, and I came up with those characters. As I stated, most of these characters are based on actual people. I use their personality, and it saved me a lot of time. And much like Mr. Schütz has stated, while he was writing that book, he was preparing the other books as well. So yeah, you're always doing that, and you're saying, "Hey, I could use this character for the next book, so let me come up with this particular character." Or, "Hey, this one reminds me of a commander I knew, or an NCO, or an officer. I could use that personality in this book. A bit exaggerated, but that personality would fit." So yes, that's basically how I get my characters.
Okay, yeah. What about you, Frank? How do you populate the cast of characters in your books?
Well, in a way, it was how I got started because I said I got the story in my head and I couldn't get it out. So I just started writing the story um, to get it out of my head because I really didn't plan on writing a fantasy novel. I didn't think I could, but I the more I wrote, the more stuck it got in my head. So I had to start developing it. And then I started having my wife who, um, well, she was a writer and an editor, and she taught high school kids literature. She was very knowledgeable. So she read some of it and she said, she gave me some really kind advice. She said, all your characters sound like you. So I had to just work on that. And, but it was driven by the story initially, but eventually the characters began to drive the story. The situation, what would they do in this situation? And so and I had to go back and kind of rework that over and over again. So that's more or less how I did that.
Yeah, I think sometimes with characters, it's kind of interesting to figure out what they would do naturally and how to make that work with the story. So,
And I did do a lot of writing of short stories as backstory for various characters. So a lot of the characters in my book have their own short story that I wrote in order to really begin to understand who they were. And so that helped me a lot. I began to be able to see differences in people and understand better how they would react under different situations.
definitely. And Justin, closing us out with this one, how did you create your cast of characters?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before with Zeno, my main protagonist, a lot of Platonic influences, a lot of Spartan influences, a lot of Jesus in Zeno, a lot of Superman in Zeno. There's a lot of me in Zeno, to be honest with you, and that way it's kind of autobiographical. For Lysandros, who was the mentor character, I wrote the kind of father that I had always wanted. I never met my dad as a kid, so he was like that mentor, that strong male influence, that guiding influence that I'd always wished that I had. For the vampire, who is the main antagonist, and you didn't get to see him in this reading, but I really tried to imagine a villain that had the psychopathy, that had the Machiavellianism, and that had the sadism, but that wasn't a narcissist, right? Someone that it's like the serial killer that doesn't have to write the note after the fact, right? I've always heard that, like when cops would say, like if these killers wouldn't be so like eager to like show off and like do this mystery, it'd be really hard to catch them, right? So that's what I wanted to get with this guy. He's just a little more. He's that much more dangerous, you see, because he's that much more practical. And then with Alexandra, who is my female lead, she is just a mix of characteristics of just some of the best women that I've met in my life, some of which I'm happy to say are here today. There's a lot of my mom and Alexandra. There's, yeah, I don't know. I guess very similar to what JL said. I mean, you meet people over the years, they leave fingerprints on your soul, and when you're a writer, I think sometimes those fingerprints wear off on the writing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that with us.
And
So at this point,
another thing
oh, go ahead.
for
Sure.
yeah, yeah, one other thing for Justin, and it's something similar to what he just said is at Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien. Most of his characters are from his university. His professor was Gandalf, and his other characters, and I think that's what Justin's alluding to, because I get a sense from what I've been listening when he was reading is that most of these characters are based either from students or fellow professors. And yes, the Zeno character does look like him because the cover of the book, when I looked at the book and I saw him, I was like, wait a minute. Oh, okay. I can see it. There it is. So what he just said is often true. Is like, yeah, people leave a footprint in your life and you use that in your books. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank
Yeah.
you, JL.
No,
I
and I
appreciate
think
that. Yeah.
it's really beautiful to just see that come through and tell that story in that way. So I just want to say thank you again to our three authors and for, being here with us, of course, but also just bringing your books to life in your own voices. So thank you to you three. Also, thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us, and celebrating these wonderful authors with us. Don't forget that you can order Avarom and the Black Riders, The Traveler, Quest for the Twins, and Thumos Rising from the links that I'm just going to put in the chat one more time for everyone here. Please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com, where you can browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or to submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and just let us know that you attended today's event. And so we'll look forward to hearing from you. But until then, have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care, Justin, Frank. See
Likewise.
you soon.
See you,
Bye-bye.
Joe.
Bye, everybody.